Good evening and welcome to a conversation with Congresswoman Liz Cheney, hosted by the Georgetown Institute of Politics and Public Service, known to many of you as GU Politics. My name is Sophie Tafazoli, and I am a sophomore in the college studying government, journalism, and theology. In terms of GU Politics, I'm a member of the Careers Committee, a writer for On the Record, and a host for the upcoming podcast, Hoyas in Politics and Public Service, or Hipster. Tonight's special guest is Representative Liz Cheney. She serves as Wyoming's lone member of Congress in the U.S. House of Representatives. She was first elected in 2016 on a platform of restoring America's strength and power in the world and pursuing conservative solutions to create jobs, cut taxes and regulation, and expand America's energy, mining, and agriculture industries. In November 2018, Cheney was elected by her colleagues to House leadership as the chair of the House Republican Conference, the third-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives. The conversation will be moderated by Mo Alathe, Executive Director of the Institute of Politics and Public Service. Please join in the conversation by tagging @GUPolitics and by using the hashtag Cheney@GU on social media. For those in the Zoom room, you can submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Mo, over to you.
Thanks, Sophie. Appreciate the introduction and also for all of your leadership at GU Politics during your time at Georgetown. Thanks for all that you do. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for, I think, what is going to be a very interesting and timely conversation. The Congresswoman and I are going to talk between the two of us for a little bit about the topic, the future of the Republican Party and the conservative movement. And then after about 25, 30 minutes or so, we're going to open it up for student questions. For students that are here in the Zoom room, you can start submitting your questions at any point during the program. Just click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, submit your question, and then at some point, someone will let you know when you'll be on camera to ask your question. And so with that, I want to thank Congresswoman Liz Cheney for joining us this evening.
Well, great to be with you, Mo, and with all the students at Georgetown. Thank you very much for having me.
Congress, we were chatting before we started, and as I was telling you, I'm a partisan. I came up through politics. I worked in Democratic politics. I was the former spokesman for the Democratic National Committee. But one thing I have always believed in my bones is that our politics are better when we have two strong parties. That when both parties are bringing their A games, it forces the other one to bring their A game, and that healthy competition of ideas leads to better governance. I truly believe that. You have talked about the need for your party to turn a corner, so to speak. And so it's in that spirit that I want to start this conversation. But I want to sort of start at the most basic level. You've been in Republican politics your whole life. It's in your blood in many ways. And so I want to start by just asking you to share your thoughts on what a Republican is. What does it mean to be a Republican?
Well, again, thank you very much, Mo, for having me. And it's interesting when you say that I've been in politics for a long time, that it's in my blood. I was actually thinking the other day when my sister and I were growing up, and my dad was in political office. My mom was writing. She was in the Reagan administration. We had these conversations around our dinner table, and they weren't politics, though. Even though my dad was in politics, the conversations were always policy. And so, it's occurred to me sometimes that I got into politics thinking that it was policy, but I love the political part of it as well. But it's really the substance that matters, in my view. And obviously, we all are partisan, and we all work hard to make sure that our party prevails. But I think at the end of the day, the voters of the country they have the kind of debate and discussion that they deserve to have when both of our parties are talking about substance. And there are big differences between what the Democratic Party wants to do today and what the Republican Party wants to do today. And, you asked, what does it mean to be a Republican? And when I think about what republicanism is, there are some pretty clear tenets to it. We believe in limited government. We believe that the family is a fundamental building block of society. When you talk about what government's role should be, we tend to think that, the federal government really ought to stay focused on those things only it can do. Things like national defense, things like securing our border. There are some basic things the federal government must do. And as Republicans, we believe that the federal government is serving its best purpose when it stays as limited as possible, and that it ought to be there for people when we need it. During times, for example, that we've experienced in the last year when we've got a pandemic, but that the programs the federal government institutes really ought to be measured based upon whether people get off of those programs. When you're talking about things like, welfare, when you're talking about what do we do about poverty, we really think that the very best thing for someone is opportunity, is the opportunity to have a job, the opportunity to work, the opportunity to get off of government programs. So, limited government, low taxes. We think that the economy works best when people can keep more of what they earn, invest it themselves, grow their businesses, that small business, the private sector, that's the engine of growth in our economy. And we ought to have policies in place that really, get the government out of the way for the most part. A strong national defense. I believe that America is an exceptional nation, that there's no nation on earth that has ever been as great a force for good as America has been in the world, and that our freedom and the freedom of our allies around the world depends upon America playing a leading role in the world. And so I think those are some of the basic things we believe in. We probably, as Republicans, most of us tend to be much more sort of textualists when it comes to the Constitution, and really believe in making sure that we continually remind people the Constitution doesn't the government doesn't give us our rights. We believe our rights come from God. The Constitution protects those rights, defends those rights, and but those rights don't come from the government. So that's sort of the big picture. I'm happy to talk about any more of those issues in depth.
Yeah, I think we're going to probably dive into a few of those in a little bit more detail. And look, what you described is what I've always heard Republicans say. I came of age during the Reagan era, of political age in the Reagan era. And everything you said really harkens back to what he talked about and what defined the Republican Party for a generation after. I guess my next question then is, do you believe that today's Republican Party lives up to the ideals you just laid out?
I do. I think that, certainly we have a variety of views in the party. If you want to talk about national security, the Republican Party is home to both me and to Rand Paul. And our views on national security are very different. Our views about America's role in the world are very different. I think that that kind of diversity of view is healthy for a party. But I think it's really important, though, that a party stand for substance and for policy. I think, for example, we should have had a platform in 2020. I think a platform is important. The platform is always a battle at the convention. And there'll be people who say, well, I haven't read it, or I don't agree with that plank or that plank. But I think platforms are important to lay out what parties stand for and what we believe in. So certainly we're not monolithic by any means. But I think that for the most part, that variety of opinion is a strength for us.
Yeah, I was gonna talk to you about the platform, because I do believe that they are a good place for the party to state its ideals beyond whoever's on the ticket, right? And this in 2020, obviously the party chose not to adopt a platform, instead saying that it was just reaffirming President Trump's America First principles. When I think about those principles compared to how you answered that first question about what the Republican Party stands for, you talked about small government. The government actually grew in size under the Trump era. When you talk about fiscal responsibility and fiscal restraint, the debt had already grown even before COVID. You can understand it growing as a result of COVID, but it grew pre-COVID. And so it sort of brings me back to that question, whether today's Republican Party is ideologically driven, or are there other forces driving it? Is it personality driven? Is it culturally driven? Is it sort of a rebellion against institutions? I'm kind of wondering what you think about all that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that certainly the Republican Party today is in a situation where, we lost the Senate, we lost the White House, we're in the minority in the House, even though it's a very small minority. So we certainly are thinking about what we have to do to change that, what we've got to do to get back those majorities and to get the White House back in 24. And, I think you would find pretty broad agreement, even among people who disagreed on policy. I think you would find broad agreement in our party that we need to be having the debate about policy, that we need to be talking about policy. Now, look, I think in both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, we're in this era of celebrity on Twitter and social media across the board, and that I think thinking about how we can in both parties, frankly, structure incentives for people to debate and engage on policy and on substance. Too often the incentives run towards, who can make the biggest splash on Twitter. And I don't think that's healthy for the party or for either one. I don't think it's healthy for our government. I don't know quite how you do that yet, but it's something certainly many of us are thinking about. How do we make sure that we're recruiting candidates who want to be engaged in the business of legislating? How do we make sure that we're recruiting candidates who really want to do the hard work? And look, as Republicans, we have a phenomenal freshman class in the House of Representatives. The people that sort of really have rolled their sleeves up to get to work aren't always the ones that get the credit on either side or get the attention on either side. But I think it's really important for us to get more of those folks who really do want to make things better for the lives of their constituents.
Yeah, you could argue that sort of you could see where we are today coming a decade ago with the rise of the Tea Party, and culminating in President Trump's election and sort of all the tumult since then, in people reacting to a lack of trust in institutions. I think back to the 2016 primaries, for example. Donald Trump came out and said, "I'm going to do all these things," and people say, "Yeah, but you're not a real conservative." But enough Republican voters said, that's not what I'm reacting to, right? What I'm reacting to is a guy who says that he's going to kind of, shake up the system. How do we, I guess more broadly, but as a Republican Party, address that lack of faith and trust in our institutions?
Well, look, I think, you've made a couple of important points there. I think, though, if you go back, for example, to the rise of the Tea Party, I think that what you saw with the rise of the Tea Party was a reaction to the Obama presidency, and in particular, a reaction to the expansion of government involvement in people's lives. And I remember when Obamacare was first being sold, was first being proposed and pushed. There was a video, and I can't remember, but there was it was a video that was sort of, it was a cartoon to show you a woman's life and how at every stage of her life, the government was there to provide support and assistance. And that really struck a lot of Republicans from the perspective of, well, wait a minute, we actually, don't view sort of the ultimate goal here as having government have a role in every single aspect of your life. And I think that the Tea Party certainly was a reaction and a response to concern about expanded government control. I think obviously concern about taxes and the increased taxation that would go with these government programs. And so I think it's important to judge each of these developments in the context of the time when they happened. And look, I think if you look today at where we are, we're at a really fascinating moment in politics. And that is in part because of what's happening on the Republican side, but it's also because of what's happening on the Democratic side. And you really do have, I think 6 years ago, you would not have had politicians who would have been successful who were willing to call themselves socialists. And we have that now. And I think that shows you some of the tension on the Democratic side that's happening and just some of the evolution in our politics that's going on across the board.
I want to spend a little bit more time on the politics and then start pivoting towards policy a little bit. But just as a reminder to the audience, feel free to submit your questions at the Q&A tab below. Let us know your name and your Georgetown affiliation as you do so. You've spoken out against conspiracy theories, QAnon, the election, the conspiracy theory about the election being rigged. You've also spoken out forcefully against some of the incendiary comments of some of your colleagues, frankly. I guess my first question for you is, since the election, many of those colleagues who pushed some of these conspiracy theories have seen record fundraising hauls. You yourself, as a result of your vote in favor, your vote to impeach, along with those other Republicans who voted to impeach or in the Senate to convict, have faced censure. How much of this is still being driven by leadership versus being driven by the grassroots and where voters are in the Republican Party?
Well, look, I think it raises a really important point. And, I think that at the end of the day, the vast majority of people who engage in politics, the vast majority of people who are elected on both sides of the aisle are there for the right reasons. I remember when I was a freshman member of the House, and I would just make it a practice to just go sit down on the House floor next to somebody I had never met before on either side of the aisle. And without exception, I found the people that I went up and introduced myself to and took the time and sat and talked to had really interesting life stories and really interesting reasons why they had decided to run for Congress. And I think that what comes along with that is a recognition and an understanding about how serious this business is. And again, we all get involved in the horse race and we all get involved in the battle and, how are you going to get your message out over the other guy's message? But at the end of the day, it should be fundamentally serious business because, we have inherited this unbelievable gift and blessing of freedom. And we have a duty, and that duty is to take seriously our oath of office, to take seriously our obligation to the Constitution, to take seriously our obligation to the Republic. And And I think that's a duty that can never be partisan. And so, I guess I don't, the way that I think of this moment that we're in is much more one of, your duty to the oath that you swore. It's an oath we swore under God. Is just more important than anything else, more important than politics or partisanship or, whose fortunes are up or whose fortunes are down at this moment. And I really do believe that the American people ultimately, the voters that your party and my party fight over tend to be the voters in the middle. They tend to be the voters who, probably aren't spending an inordinate amount of time on politics like we do. But they're the moms in suburbs who just want their kids to be in school. They want their kids to be safe. They want to know the people they elect are competent. They're going to do the right things. They're going to use good judgment, be responsible. I would argue, let them keep more of their own money, make sure that the police are funded, make sure the country is safe. That those are the issues on which those voters are going to be engaged, and ultimately competent, responsible, conservative leadership is the answer to that. And I think it's we all have to decide how we're going to conduct ourselves, and I think that's a really important part of being able to convince people they ought to entrust you with their vote with authority.
So I guess the last question I'll ask then on the politics is, you've talked about needing to turn a corner from the Trump years and even from him. It seems like so much of the party, though, is still embracing and accommodating him, despite the loss and despite what happened on January 6th. What's the answer here? How does the party turn the corner when, you've got the NRCC sending out fundraising emails saying, if you don't re-up with us, we're going to tell President Trump you're a defector. How do you turn the corner as a party when it seems like it just can't let go or doesn't want to let go?
Well, I guess policy is really important. And, I think that when you look at the Trump years, the Trump administration, I voted with President Trump something like 94% of the time because of the policies. And I represent Wyoming. Deregulation is very important for us. We are a state that's 50% of our land is owned by the federal government. And so policies that help to restore control to the local level and policies that help get the federal government out of the business of trying to make land use decisions for our ranchers and our energy industry are really important. So that the policies that helped bring economic growth, helped bring increased employment, helped ensure that we had adequate resources, or the beginning of adequate resources for the national defense. Those policies are really important and are good ones. And I think that the way the party has to go forward is by focusing on those policies, and by very clearly rejecting what happened on January 6th, by very clearly rejecting the symbols that we saw on January 6th of anti-Semitism, Confederate flag in the rotunda. Those are the things that, we have to be clear. And look, again, both parties have to be clear. Representative Ilhan Omar, for example, a couple of years ago said some things that were clearly anti-Semitic, and leadership on the Democratic side wouldn't take action, for example, to remove her from the Foreign Affairs Committee. I think when you're talking about something like anti-Semitism, racism, white supremacy, those have to be rejected out of hand by anyone who is engaged in any level of our politics or our political discussion. And as a party, we have to be sure that we are always acting in a way, we have to work towards acting in a way that's worthy of being the party of Lincoln and being the party of Reagan. Those are the sort of aspirational set of policy ideals and agenda that we have to present to the voters.
Let's turn a little bit to what's going on in Congress and some of the substance. It's been a while since your party was in the minority, right? Across the board. And this, I think, is really sort of more of a general question.
That with glee, Mo.
I've learned to relish these moments when I can. But this is, I think, something that we struggled with when we were in the minority. How do you balance being the opposition party to actually pushing a proactive agenda?
It's very interesting question because when you're in the minority, it becomes very easy to just be saying no all the time. And I would argue that your party is giving us a lot to say no to, and it becomes easy just to do that. And I think it's important. I know, people around the country, my constituents certainly want to know that we're fighting against the policies that we think will be bad and dangerous. So that's important. But then you also have to remind yourself that when you're going out to try to tell people, listen, here's why you ought to put us in the majority. Here's why you should put us in charge. You have to have a positive agenda, and you have to be able to explain what you would do with it. And there's always, especially in Congress, there's always this discussion about, should we go through the difficulty of putting together legislative language on issue X or issue Y? When you're in the minority and you know that isn't going to go anyplace, you have a balance between is it better to have that clear alternative legislative proposal that you can show to people and say, look, this is exactly what we're going to do, or is it better not to go through the difficulty of trying to get everybody, because we have a pretty large minority now, so getting everybody on board for crossing every T and dotting every I is challenging, especially if you know that the proposal is not going someplace. But I think we're really dedicated to making sure that we are providing alternatives, that we are we're clear. You can look at the infrastructure proposal, for example, the President Biden has proposed. Infrastructure is a place where there's agreement on parts of it. There is agreement on things that we could get done. We tend to think that it's a very small percentage of the bill that's being proposed, or the being outlined, that's really focused on infrastructure. And so, talking about the kinds of things we need to see, like rural broadband, for example, but being clear at the same time that, we're not interested in a much larger package that's got spending that is, indefensible because of some of the other issues you mentioned, like the debt. So it's constantly making sure people know why we oppose what we oppose, but then also setting out what we believe in, what we stand for, what we'll do when we have the majority back.
So, you're in the House, so it's always an election cycle. As you're thinking ahead, and I'm not saying this in just pure crass political terms, but as you think ahead, you're going to have to start making your case to voters pretty soon about the Republican agenda. You just mentioned an alternate view on infrastructure than what the White House has. What are the 2 or 3 other issues that Republicans are prepared to step up and say, this is where we want to lead moving forward as you make your case? You may not be able to enact it now, being in the minority, but here's what voters should expect from a Republican Party.
Well, I think it's many of the issues we've talked about before. I think that, laying out for the voters our views about how important it is, for example, to continue to fund police in cities around the country, our views about how important it is to adopt policies that will grow the economy, our views about taxes. I think one of the problems with this infrastructure plan is it's so big and it's so much spending. Corporate taxes are going to go up as part of the plan. And you will also see, I believe, middle-class taxes go up because there will be no alternative. And so talking to people about why we've come through a year of pandemic We're not finished by any means yet, but I think we're to a place where we're beginning to see things come back. We're beginning to see, because of the vaccine, businesses are returning more to the way they were pre-2020. And we need to make sure that our policies help that recovery to take place, that they don't stifle the recovery, that they don't cost jobs. And I also worry very much about inflation. I think we're going to have a conversation with our voters about, the amount of money that the Biden administration wants to pump into the economy raises real concern. We understand that there was a reason why you had to have limited and targeted assistance to help people get through COVID, but I'm not sure anybody knows for sure. And I know you've certainly seen some Democratic economists, Larry Summers, for example, talk about the concern for our fiscal stability as well as potential inflation, significant inflationary pressure when you begin to pump as much money into the economy as you are right now. So we'll talk about those things. We want kids back in school. That's really important. And the national security set of issues. Those have taken a back seat for a range of reasons. But, while we have been focused on COVID, the Chinese have been very clearly modernizing, expanding their military. They've got an aggressive strategy and objectives globally. The Russians have been as well. The Iranians and North Koreans. We face significant national security challenges, just as we're going to be facing downward pressure on the budget because of COVID and the other spending that we've had to do.
So we're going to go to student questions in just a moment, but let's stay on national security for a moment. You mentioned earlier about how the Republican Party has room for Rand Paul and for you, with very different approaches to national security. That there are a lot of people within the Republican Party who sort of embrace a more, America first, inward looking, let's not get active elsewhere. And then there are those who believe that there is more of a role for the United States abroad. And it's a pretty intense, as I think you would agree, there's a real tension there within the party. Tell me where you think the party needs to be and where it should go moving forward.
Well, I think that first of all, we need to ask ourselves sort of a basic question, which should guide every decision we make from a national security perspective. And that is, what does America's security require? And, my own view is we have seen historically that isolationism doesn't work. We've seen historically what happens when America withdraws and leaves a vacuum. It isn't sort of our friends and allies who also believe in democracy who will fill a vacuum that we leave. It will be the Chinese Communist Party. It'll be the Russians. It'll be those nations that don't fundamentally believe in the freedoms that we do, and who won't certainly, not only will they not defend them, but they will clearly infringe upon them. The Chinese Communist Party is very hard at work building what they hope will be a global surveillance state. And I think as Americans, we have to recognize and understand that we cannot expect to maintain our own freedom and security and prosperity if we take the approach, if it's happening across the ocean, it's happening outside our borders, it's not our concern. We know that's not the case. And so I think whether you're talking about the work we have to do with our allies, whether you're talking about the work we need to do on cybersecurity or in space, nuclear modernization, we always have to remember that what's provocative is weakness. And the best way to avoid having to use military force is for our adversaries to have no doubt that we will if necessary. You don't want your adversaries ever to think they can challenge us, they can take action that challenges our allies. If they make a mistake, that's very dangerous. And so I think we have to be clear. I'm concerned about the defense budget that has just been proposed. We also had a letter signed by 50 House Democrats suggesting a 10% cut across the board to the defense budget. And when you look at the accomplishments that our adversaries have made from a military perspective and the extent to which they can challenge us, I think we have to make sure the American people understand that we can't just assume we're going to have superiority, be able to protect our interests. We have to work for that, and that takes resources.
I have so many follow-up questions I want to ask, but let's bring in some voices, and these students typically ask better questions than I do anyway. So again, feel free to continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab at the bottom. And when I call on your name, you will be on camera. Go ahead and introduce yourself, who you are, your Georgetown affiliation, and where you're zooming in from. Okay, our first question is going to come from Dan. Dan, go ahead and introduce yourself. Dan, I think you're on mute still. Wouldn't be a Zoom event if we didn't have to make that reminder once.
How's that? Am I in?
There we go. We're good.
I apologize for the delay. Good evening, Representative Cheney. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Yeah.
My question is kind of concerning, going back to where Mo talked about where the Republican Party is going, but what do you think the chances are that the Republican Party would split, either the former president creating a new party or those who might not be aligned with his values splitting off? And what, in your opinion, do you feel would be the implications to the country if that would happen?
I think that would be a really bad thing. I think it'd be really bad for the Republican Party, and I think it would be really bad for the country generally. I think what Mo said at the beginning is absolutely right, that our system really works best and it's healthiest and it produces the best outcomes when we have two strong parties competing with each other. We don't have any provision in our system for proportional representation. That having a third party, I think, would basically ensure at this point that those ideals and principles and philosophies that I believe the Republican Party stands for, those would be at risk. That we would have a much harder time in securing majority. And so I think that a third party would be a mistake. And I think it's unlikely to happen. I think you always have rumblings out there, but you only have to look back to the most successful third party ever was it Ross Perot, and what did he get? I was like 20 something. I mean, not significant. So I don't think that's going to happen, and I think it would be bad if it did happen. Mo, I think you're muted now.
Now I'm the one. Thanks for the question, Dan. Okay, next, let's go to Rhea.
Hello, Representative Cheney. Thank you very, very much for being on this call with us today. I'm honored to be able to hear your thoughts and your views. My name is Rhea, and I'm a first-year undergraduate student in the School of Foreign Service. I am studying international political economy and minoring in justice and peace studies. I would love to hear your opinion on the alleged divergence between the Republican Party and what is now known as Trump's party. Are they the same thing? Are they different? And if they are different, how do we ensure that society and American citizens know that in order to depolarize our politics? Thank you in advance.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the question and thanks for being here. Look, there's one Republican Party. And we have differing opinions in the party about a whole range of issues. And I think that, that is, for the most part, a really healthy thing. And so I think that, the issue of polarization, partly, when I think about what causes polarization in our politics, I return again and again to social media. And social media can be a wonderful thing in a lot of ways. But it is also true that people are a lot more likely to say something really mean on social media that they would not say to your face. And I'm not speaking from experience there at all. Not really. But I think that it's really important for us, again, what Mo and I were talking about earlier, to go back to substance, go back to ideas. I think especially as we're reaching out to young people and number one, encouraging you so much to get involved. And I say that no matter where you are on the political spectrum. Of course, I want the opportunity to convince you that you should be a Republican, that you should be conservative, and why. But no matter where you are on the political spectrum, it really matters to get involved. And I have spent a large part of my career, I worked at the State Department, worked in the private sector, grew up around, politics and policy, but really struck me, the first time I walked onto the floor of the House of Representatives and cast my vote for the people of Wyoming was a really moving moment. And you realize, on just about a daily basis that it's individual people who make a difference. And I know sometimes when you're in college, it can seem like, how can I possibly make a difference? But I tell you, if you go back through American history and through world history, you will see invariably that it actually is individuals who make a difference. And, they bring people with them and they inspire people and they encourage them. But our country really needs young people to be involved and engaged. And I just think it's a lot more interesting and appealing to get engaged if you're talking about substance and policy than if we're all just screaming at each other.
Thanks for the question, Ria. But to Ria's point, and harkening back to something you talked about earlier, this whole question of is the Republican Party now the Trump party, and how do you turn the corner from that? When and I sort of asked this question, but she framed it much more succinctly. When the former president is still out there promoting the conspiracy theory about the election, and there's an entire ecosystem around him that continues to push that, and there are so many people in leadership who are accommodating that. I get your point, and I agree with your point that part of the pivot has to be to policy. That's how you turn the corner. The policy is getting drowned out by that. And so how do you and your party, those of you who agree, those of your colleagues who agree with you, how do you make sure that you can push past that when so much of the oxygen is still in that room?
Yeah, I think there are several things. One is that, the most important thing has to be the truth. And we have to be willing to speak the truth. And the truth is that the election wasn't stolen. That doesn't mean that there weren't irregularities. It doesn't mean that there wasn't fraud. It doesn't mean, that there aren't improvements that can be made. But we're a nation that is governed by the rule of law. In each of the states where people wanted to contest the results, there is a legal process to do it. That happened, and the Electoral College met. December 14th is the end. December 14th has got to be the moment. And look, people on the call, maybe some of you weren't born in 2000, maybe all of you weren't born in 2000, but I know Mo remembers the 2000 election. We went on for 37 days, counting and recounting what was happening in Florida before finally the Supreme Court ruled and, President Bush was elected. And I will never forget, and this was a very clear memory for me, even before what happened on January 6th, sitting on the platform on Inauguration Day in 2001 and watching President Bush take the oath of office, but being really moved by the fact that we had been through this unbelievable battle that had gone on and on and on. And at the end of it, Al Gore conceded. He did what was right for the nation, and we had a peaceful transition of power. And I've worked in countries around the world where they don't have peaceful transitions of power. And that's one of the reasons why what happened on January 6th, why I know it was so dangerous. And so I think that, again, for us as a party, we have to be clear what we stand for. We have to be clear that we're going to always tell our constituents and our voters the truth, that we owe them that. And that includes about impeachment. It includes about what happened on the 6th. It includes about the election. And look, from a political standpoint, for Republicans, we actually really need to understand what happened in the election of 2020, because we want to win in 22 and in 24. So in addition to the number one issue, which is the damage that it does to our democratic process to claim an election was stolen or rigged when it wasn't, it also it doesn't make any sense politically to be doing that, because we want to get those voters back. And so I think that's all part of, being a party of truth and being a party of substance and hopefulness. I think people are they're tired of the vengeance and the vitriol. They want some hope. And they want to know that, their elected officials are going to put forward policies and programs that can provide that.
Okay, we've got a few more questions we want to try to get in before the end. So let's go to Mateo.
Good afternoon, Congresswoman. My name is Mateo. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. And thank you so much for your courage to speak truth in the Republican Party. I'm a sophomore in the college studying government and classics. And my question to you sums up the last two questions a little bit and refocuses it a little bit more. My question is, what can I do as an individual Republican college student to contribute to a healthy political system, especially that which recognizes the negative effects of Trumpism on the Republican Party and the negative effects of using the outrage machine for political points?
Well, thanks, Mateo, for your interest. And, I think a big thing that, and I think especially young people are really well positioned to do this. A big thing we need to do is figure out how to fight disinformation. And, I think those of us in my generation, have a disadvantage. You all grew up, you understand, social media more than we do. You understand the ways that information gets out there. You understand where, your friends are getting their news and information. You guys are going to be on the front lines of figuring out how people know that what they're seeing and reading and hearing is true. And, when I was your age, we still had the nightly news. I mean, we still do today, but, that was where everybody got their news. You would turn on the network in the evening and you would get your news from there. You'd get your news from reading the actual hard copy of a newspaper. And there was certainly bias, but it wasn't sort of news for entertainment. What I worry about now is that, all of the cable shows basically have decided what their audience segment is, and they tell their audience what the audience wants to hear because they're worried if they say something different, people are going to turn them off. And so we have to figure out in the whole world of, big tech, how do we encourage the free flow of information? How do people have confidence that what they're reading and hearing and seeing is true? And I say that also because we know that there are foreign actors who use the divisions in our society and who encourage the divisions in our society and who use disinformation to do that. I think that's really important. Educating yourself as you clearly are committed to doing. Speaking out. I know it can be difficult to be a Republican on college campuses these days. And I think this is where, the left will try to silence you, and that's wrong. College should be a place where there is a wide exchange of views and where you can figure out what you believe because you're engaging with your friends about the issues. and people shouldn't be silenced. I think that's one of the most dangerous things that's going on today, is a lack of understanding and respect for the First Amendment. And so, arm yourself, prepare yourself for argument, and volunteer and get involved in politics and figure out if, putting your name on the ballot is something you'd like to do. And I hope it is, because we really, as I said, we need young people engaged and involved. It's very important.
That's what we're all about here at the Institute. Okay, let's go to Frank next.
Hello, Congresswoman. Again, echoing everyone before me, I'm deeply appreciative of your being here. When I heard about this webinar, I signed up for it immediately. My question has to do with, what is it about Trump and Trumpism that broadened the diversity of our voting base, specifically with Latino voters? And is it possible to actually continue growing that diversity, without Trump, the personality?
Look, I think if you look at the policies of the Trump administration, if you look at the last 4 years, and you see things like economic growth, opportunity, you look at the levels in particular of job growth among minority communities, for women, and I think that's a Republican set of policies, basically. And this is another thing, I do tend to think sometimes what happens is, and I'm sure Mo will not agree with this, but that the Democratic Party segments society and sometimes can be very condescending. I say this as a woman, in saying these particular sets of issues, those are the women's issues. And if we want to talk to women, we're only going to talk about those issues. Instead of saying, wait a minute, we understand and recognize that there aren't women's issues, that, women and minority voters care about a whole range of issues. And we don't want to, be patronizing about only talking about these issues to women. So I do think that it's in large part economic opportunity. And I think that those kinds of policies are very important for us to make sure those are the policies that we were advocating, during the Reagan administration, during the Bush administration, during the Trump administration. Those are the policies that ought to continue. And I think, again, being clear and specific about that we're the party that will put forward policies that will make people's lives better, give people the opportunity to make their own lives better. Those are the kinds of messages that I think are important and will continue to resonate, in 22 and 24 and beyond.
Thanks for the question, Frank. We've got like 5 minutes left and 2 more questions we want to try to squeeze in, if that works for you, Congresswoman. Let's go to Grace next.
Hi, thank you so much for being here again. I'll try to make this quick so we can fit in 2 questions. So I noticed that you were talking a lot about fiscal policy and policy related to national security. And I also know that being a student on a college campus, I hear a lot of students saying that they are socially liberal, but fiscally conservative is the thing that people throw around a lot. So with that being said, do you think that the Republican Party will ever become more left-leaning in regards to social issues? And do you think that that is something that could benefit the party?
I think, as on a range of other issues in the Republican Party, you have a range of views on social issues. I think, for example, if you look at the issue of, are you pro-choice or pro-life? We have people in the Republican Party who are both. I don't believe, I'm not sure, but I don't think there's a single Democratic member of Congress anymore who's pro-life. I could be wrong about that, but very few. So I think that's an example of a position that, a place where the Democratic Party has said, no, we're going to be completely, exclusionary and only have people who are pro-choice in this party. So I think there's a range of views, a variety of views. I also think that, on some level, what we ought to be able to do is recognize we're not going to be all things to all people. And you don't have to say, I agree on every single issue with everybody in the Republican Party or with our platform when we have one. you really just need to be able to say to yourself, look, what are the most important issues to me? And I think, the whole issue of being fiscally conservative is one we haven't talked about enough. Mo's right. Spending has increased significantly. It's particularly increased over the course of the last several months. But, we have these huge debates in Congress about whether we're going to spend a certain amount on domestic spending or a certain amount on defense. Those debates we're having are really over something like 24% of the budget. The vast majority of the federal budget is mandatory spending that Congress has nothing to do with every year. And it is we're getting close to a crisis point. We're getting close to a moment where if we don't figure out how to get that spending under control, the programs that it's funding will collapse. You could have significant negative consequences for the United States, economic system in general. People could start to question, whether or not the United States can continue to be the world's reserve currency. And there are very significant and dangerous consequences if we don't address the mandatory side of the budget. We have to do it. And that's another place. It has to be bipartisan. No party can do that on its own. And we need to find ways to do that.
Grace, thanks for the question. And let's go to Brooke for our final question.
Hi, Congressman Whitman Cheney. My name is Brooke Palmer-Cool. I'm a graduate student in my second year with the School of Continuing Studies, doing a master's in communications and corporate comm. So transparency is key. Woohoo. Yep. But I guess to build on your last point, my question is, do you have a hope for a more bipartisan future of our government? As VP Harris is fiercely liberal and Biden is more moderate, to build on Mo's question, do you think it can push forward as everything seems so punctuated with visceral political responses? Like, do you really feel that could change?
Yeah, look, I think it has to change. What I see right now in the House, for example, the way that the House of Representatives should work is that, we ought to actually be legislating. We ought to actually have committee hearings and mark up bills and have amendments. And we ought to have debate about those amendments on the floor of the House and in committee so people can make decisions about what they want to support. What we've seen for the first 3 months now of this year has not been that. It's been a rule that has allowed the Democrats to bring to the floor, $1.9 trillion spending bill with limited committee hearings, amendment, debate time. I think it was an hour of debate. And so that's not conducive to bipartisanship, and it's not conducive to actually moving the ball forward. And the Republicans certainly engage in partisanship too. I think, and I hope that because of the seriousness of the issues that are facing the country, and because I think it's clear that the American people want us to get things done, they want us to work together, they want us to be able to negotiate and get things done in a bipartisan fashion. I hope that we will be able to do that. It is, because the election cycle is as quick as it is, and the margins are so close. Politics does take up an awful lot of the oxygen in the room. But I'm always hopeful that we can come together. Now, let me also say, though, I don't believe in bipartisanship just for the sake of bipartisanship. I think that it has to be bipartisanship to get a good thing done. I don't think we should join together, on bills that are bad bills just because it'll be bipartisan. But I think ultimately, to get the big things done, we have to work in a bipartisan fashion.
Thanks for the question, Brooke. Congresswoman, our motto, our slogan at the Institute is public service is a good thing. Politics can be too. That's been tested lately, but we remain hopeful. And I think I can speak for everybody at Georgetown and the McCourt School and at our institute in saying that it's dialogues like this that help get us there. And so I want to thank you so much for taking so much time and sharing your thoughts with us and engaging directly with our students. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for really enjoyed it. Thank you, Mo.
Thanks. And to all of you who watched tonight and participated, thank you for spending part of your evening with us. Please stay tuned for other programming as we rapidly move towards the end of the semester. Our next program is tomorrow evening. Please join us at 5:30 p.m. Eastern as we're joined by Chris Krebs, the former head of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, for a conversation about election integrity and cybersecurity more broadly. That's again 5:30 p.m. Eastern. You can follow on all of our social media channels at GU Politics. And so with that, I want to thank you all. Thanks to the Congresswoman again, and we'll see you at the next event. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.